Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are continuing our study and discussion of the law of one today. And last video, we went over the 7 densities of consciousness, the 7 levels of experience that we need to move through in order to know ourselves completely and return back to the fullness of the Creator and our true nature. And so now we're really getting into, if the first 3 videos, which was about cosmogenesis and the kind of cosmology, how we got from infinity or nothingness perhaps to here, and if the 7 densities was a broad overview of what we are experiencing now to some extent and what we will experience later as we move past their density, we're now at the critical point really in the law of one, and we're going to go in depth into third density, which is where we're at now as humans here on Earth, and what exactly we are meant to be doing here as humans. So I don't think I will make a more important video in terms of life now on Earth. Of course, coupled with the concept of the third density and the choice that we're here to make, which is what we're about to get into, are the chakras and the self-healing processes that allow this choice to be made more consciously, more fully, and in a more balanced, let's say powerful way. So I'm really excited to get into this, and yeah, let's do it. So we learned in the last video about the 7 densities that third density is about learning the ways of love, right? We briefly went over the 2 ways in which we can do that, where we will be positively polarizing along the service to others path, love of others through serving others, or the negative path, negative polarization. And Ra calls this love of self. Now, before we get into this, I would like to discuss this point because Ra's terminology on this concept of negative polarization being love of self can be very confusing and is a bit misleading, honestly. So I just want to clarify that we're not, when we're talking about polarization along the negative path, we're not saying love of self as in self-care, taking care of our diet, taking care of our physical body, having compassion for ourselves, love for ourselves, treating ourselves well. This is not that kind of love of self. What Ra really means here when they say love of self, it means learning the ways of love through serving the self by controlling, manipulating, and dominating others. Okay, so just hopefully you'll be able to make that separation in your mind. In context of polarization, the negative path, the quote unquote love of self path, simply means treating others in a way that allows for increasing levels of self benefit, right? Fulfilling desire and want through manipulation, control, and domination of others. Okay? And so this choosing of polarity, choosing of a path or a positive, the positive and negative path, it literally is the purpose of third density human, as we experience it as humans, life. This is the purpose of life, to choose a path and polarize far enough along either path to the extent that it grants graduation or entry into the 4th density. So let's get into what that means exactly. How much do we have to serve others in order to graduate along the positive to graduate into 4th density positive? How much do we have to be serving the self to graduate into 4th density negative? This is all clearly and plainly laid out by Ra here. And so we'll get into it. So this choice of serving others or serving the self seems relatively simple, right? It seems like, oh, if we're just nice to others and we consider others and we're helpful and hospitable and amiable to others, that means we're serving others, right? And yes, it does mean that we're serving others. But there are deep sort of metaphysical and energetic principles here at play, especially when we consider the concept of polarity. So in a battery, the battery has a positive pole and a negative pole, right? And so it's the same with consciousness. As we move further along, we're charging ourselves, we're polarizing, charging, becoming more and more powerful along one of the two paths. Now, the issue is that most people don't understand that their daily choices are causing them to polarize in one direction or another: service to others, positive path, or service to self, negative path. So the desire really is to become aware of the metaphysical principles at play in each and every moment of our day. And then if we know what's happening and we sort of know the game and we know the rules of the game, then we can start to make choices that are more informed with our knowledge of the choice to be made, and knowing that when we consciously choose service to others or service to self, we are empowering our own development and evolution in mind, body, and spirit. Now, I will talk about the positive path and the negative path here, and Ra gives some kind of, we'll go into the qualities and characteristics of both. However, if you're desiring information to seek further along the negative path, I have nothing to offer you other than Ra's discourse on the positive and negative path. I'm on the positive path. That's the one I've chosen. Service to others. I seek to know myself better each and every day so that I can be of better service to others. And I'm just going to assume that anyone here watching this is either unconsciously desiring to polarize along the positive path, or they've already chosen, and so we're here together. So if you're on the negative path, you will have to look elsewhere. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about are three quotes that sort of give the undergirding, the foundation of what we're going to be discussing. And it's really helpful if you can keep these three quotes in mind, in your conscious mind, as often as possible. Okay. So the first one here is, Ra says, the purpose of incarnative existence is evolution of mind, body, and spirit. That is the purpose of being in a physical body, to evolve in mind, body, and spirit. Second, the purpose of incarnation in third density is to learn the ways of love, which we briefly just discussed. The third density is a choice. Okay? So let's try to remember this. Purpose of being in incarnation in a physical form is to evolve in mind, body, and spirit. And this continues in the higher densities, right? Each density has a time cycle, a length of time. So to be experiencing time means you're in a body experiencing time as it passes. So even into sixth density, Ra has a physical body. Beings in the sixth dimension, sixth density, also have physical bodies. The physical body sort of likely ceases to exist once you get into seven, because you're moving, as we learned in the last video, into a state of timelessness or foreverness, as Ra calls it. Good. Now, the purpose of incarnation in third is to learn the ways of love: love of others, serving others, love of self, controlling, manipulating, dominating others for self benefit. Okay. And now the third density is a choice. So if you can keep this in mind, the third density is a choice. I'm here to make a choice. Which choice am I going to make? How do I go about making that choice each and every day with simple daily actions? And of course, through intention setting and having a broader perspective, you can make daily choices that enable you to reach maybe a goal that you see further down the line, or a set of achievements or goals or desires that you're wanting to grow that take a little bit more time than a day. Like, say, learning to open the heart, learning to balance second and third chakra blockages related to sense of self, how I relate to others, how I feel about myself, the throat chakra, wisdom, right? Like we can see further out certain levels of beingness that we are hoping to attain. But also in each and every moment on a daily basis, we can be making choices that help us to polarize, positive or negative. Okay. So the first thing we'll talk about is the cycle of third density. We learned in the last video, first density was approximately 2 billion years. Second density was approximately 4.6 billion years. And so let's see what Ra has to say about the length of third density. Don asks, what is the length in our years of one of these third density cycles currently? Ra says, one major cycle is approximately 25,000 of your years. There are 3 cycles of this nature during which those who have progressed may be harvested. At the end of 3 major cycles, that is, approximately between 75 and 76,000 of your years, all are harvested regardless of their progress, for during that time, the planet itself has moved through the useful part of that dimension and begins to cease being useful for the lower levels of vibration within that density. So we have a 75,000 year cycle here on Earth, right? So let's go to some more quotes about this. Don asks, what is the density level of our planet at this time? Ra says, I am Ra. The sphere upon which you dwell is third density in its beingness of mind, body, spirit complexes. That's us, humans. It is now in a space-time continuum, fourth density. This is causing a somewhat difficult harvest. Now, let's briefly talk about space-time and time-space. You'll see this mentioned throughout the material if you study it on your own, and there's some more quotes here where Ra mentions space-time. So space-time is what we experience now in the physical reality, or we could call it physical illusion, right? In space-time, we are free to move through space, but we're bound by time. We can't choose to go backwards in time. We can't choose to skip forward ahead in time. We're bound by the limitations of time, but we can move through space. That is space-time. Time-space is the inverse of this, where you are essentially, this is what we would call the non-physical or kind of etheric or astral realm, right? In time-space, you're bound sort of in space, but you can move through time. So in the time-space portion of the creation, after we leave our physical body, I'll get into this in another video, but just briefly, Ra says that you meet with one of your teachers and you review your incarnation. So you are able to move back through time, look at everything that happened in your life, see how well you did, see if you learned the lessons that you were hoping to achieve, see if you achieved the goals or if you completed the mission that you came to complete. You can look at all the missteps that you took, and you're able to then look into the future, move into the future, and program the next incarnation depending on what happened in the last one. Lessons learned, failed, etc., etc. Okay, so in time-space, you're able to move through time, but you're relatively bound in a single location. Space-time is here now, physical form. Time-space is non-physical. That's a super oversimplification, but just keep that in mind, okay? So, Don asks next. No, we'll review this quote really quick. The sphere upon which you dwell is third density in its beingness of mind, body, spirit complexes. It is now in a space-time continuum, fourth density. This is causing a somewhat difficult harvest. So the planet itself is already 4D vibrational level. Now, because human beings, by and large, have not been able to realize what they're doing here, or what we're supposed to, how we can go about moving harmoniously with the planet into 4D, we're still very, very much stuck in 3D level consciousness, vibration, 3D level of awareness, okay? Don asks next, what is the position of this planet with respect to progression of the cycle at this time? Ra says, I am Ra. This sphere is at this time in fourth dimension vibration. Its material is quite confused due to the society memory complexes, again, humanity as a whole, embedded in its consciousness. It has not made an easy transition to the vibration which beckons. Therefore, it will be fetched with some inconvenience. Don continues, is this inconvenience imminent within a few years? Ra says, I am Ra. This inconvenience or disharmonious vibratory complex has begun several of your years in the past. It shall continue unabated for a period of approximately 30 of your years. This was said in 1981. If we add 30 years to that, we're talking about 2011, 2012. Don then asks, after this 30-year period, I am assuming that we will be a fourth dimension or fourth density planet. Is this correct? Ra says, this is so. So it's interesting to think about 2011, 2012, and sort of the progression through the 25,000 year cycles, I feel that this is what the Mayans were talking about when they talked about the world was going to end in 2012. Uh, I think they meant that third density was going to end around 2012, and that they knew that we were entering into a new sort of phase of evolution for humanity. Again, it's just that it hasn't been allowed to fully complete. The transition cannot complete itself because most humans are still stuck completely and have not only no knowledge of what it would mean to evolve mentally, physically, spiritually, but there's almost no desire among humanity as a whole to even consider the concept of soul evolution. So we are inhibiting the progression of planet Earth going into 4D. Okay. Next, Don asks, how does a third density planet become a fourth density planet? Ra says, the fourth density is as regularized in its approach as the striking of a clock upon the hour. The space-time of your solar system has enabled this planetary sphere to spiral into space-time of a different vibrational configuration. This causes the planetary sphere to be able to be molded by these new vibrations. However, the thought forms of your people during this transition period are such that the mind-body-spirit complexes of both individual and societies are scattered throughout the spectrum, instead of becoming able to grasp the needle, shall we say, and point the compass in one direction. Thus, the entry into the vibration of love, sometimes called by your people the vibration of understanding, is not effective with the present societal complex. Thus, the harvest shall be such that many will repeat the third density cycle. The energies of your wanderers, your teachers, and your adepts at this time are all bent upon increasing the harvest. However, there are few to harvest. Womp womp. So that's where we're at. Don then asks, then what will be the time of transition on this planet from third to fourth density? Ra says, this is difficult to estimate due to the uncharacteristic anomalies of this transition. There are at this space-time nexus souls incarnate which have begun fourth density work. However, the third density climate of planetary consciousness is retarding the process. At this particular nexus, the probability vortices indicate somewhere between 100 and 700 of your years as transition period. This cannot be accurate due to the volatility of your peoples at this space-time. So Ra is saying for the planet to go fully 4D and for whoever's left among humanity, somewhere between 100 and 700 years, we will become 4D. Humanity will become 4D positive. But if you see and have a look at what's going on in the world, it would seem that we're a long ways off from that still. And if we remember from the last video, we learned that a social memory complex is when a group of souls has gathered together and their intent consciously of seeking in one particular direction. So that is what humanity will need to do in order to fully make the transition from third to fourth. The planet's already 4D. We can tap into those energies by doing self-healing and self-balance. The energies and the vibration that bring healing and the concepts of universal love, compassion, understanding, forgiveness, acceptance, they're here now for the taking. It's just a matter of focusing our attention on them and attempting to really learn those lessons. Okay. So now you probably already noticed that the third density cycles extremely rapidly, right? So Don has a few questions about this. He asks, then we have a third density that is, comparatively speaking, the twinkling of an eye, the snap of a finger in time compared to the others. Why does the third density cycle so extremely rapidly compared to first and second? Ra says, the third density is a choice. Third density, then, it appears, is, compared to the rest of the densities, all of them, nothing but a uniquely short period of what we consider to be time, and is then for the purpose of this choice. Is this correct? Ra says, this is precisely correct. They then say, the polarization or choosing of polarity of each mind-body-spirit complex, human, is necessary for harvestability from third density. The higher densities do their work due to the polarity gained in this choice. So there it is again. We're here to make the choice of polarity. If we don't make the choice of polarity, we will repeat third density. And it's my sense that because the planet is at the very end of its cycle, Ra's saying again, you got maybe 100, 700 years to reincarnate on this planet, especially those souls who are more evolved and who have done enough work through third density reincarnations to gain the opportunity for harvest. They're still coming, right? But potentially, if the 3D repeaters from Earth, if they have to repeat, they'll probably just do it on another planet somewhere else. But I don't know, that just seems that way to me. Okay. So next, we're going to get into now what is required exactly to graduate along the service to others or the service to self path. This is very helpful to understand. Okay. So Don asks, in the book Oaspe, it states that if an individual is more than 50% for others, that is, goes over the 50% service to others and is less than 50% service to self, then he is harvestable. Is this a correct statement? Ra says, I am Ra. This is correct if the harvesting is to be for the positive fourth dimensional level. Don then asks, what must be the entity's percentage, shall we say, if he is to be harvested for the negative? Ra says, the entity who wishes to pursue the path of service to self must attain a grade of 5. That is 5% service to others, 95% service to self. It must approach totality. The negative path is quite difficult to attain harvestability upon and requires great dedication. Don asks, why is the negative path so much more difficult a path to attain harvestability upon than the positive? Ra says, this is due to a distortion of the law of one, which indicates that the gateway to intelligent infinity, which is contact with the one infinite creator, be a gateway at the end of a straight and narrow path. This is a crucial point right here coming next. To attain 51% dedication to the welfare of other selves is as difficult as attaining a grade of 5% dedication to other selves. The, shall we say, sinkhole of indifference is between those two. So I would say it's pretty clear that the vast majority of people on Earth are operating in what Ra calls the sinkhole of indifference. We're indifferent to the process of evolution. We have no conscious knowledge of the path or the process rather of evolution, and so we just sink further and further into third density repetition, more and more 3D incarnations, because we're not really paying attention to attempting to evolve in mind, in body, and in spirit. And so Ra says, yeah, to serve others 51% of the time is as difficult as serving the self 95% of the time, right? So these are the guidelines, basically, for attempting to polarize and graduate along the positive and negative paths. Okay. So next, Ra says, although there are many people who, on a daily basis, are practicing some form of expression of love, right? Lots of kind, compassionate, loving people, and even though they're doing these things and they are polarizing along the positive path, if they were to become consciously aware of the process and the real sort of rules of the game and the mechanism of the game, then they can really empower their own growth and development and evolution. Okay, so Don asks here, while an entity is incarnate in this third density at this time, he may either learn without consciously knowing what he's doing, or he may learn after he is consciously aware that he is learning in the ways of the law of one. The second way, it is possible for the entity to greatly accelerate his growth. Is this not correct? Ra says this is correct. Don then asks, then although many entities are not aware of this, what they really desire is to accelerate their growth, and it is their job to discover this while incarnate. Is it correct that they can accelerate their growth much more while incarnate in third density than in between incarnations in third density? Ra says, this is correct. The law of one has one of its primal distortions, the free will distortion, which we learned about earlier. in the first and second and third video. Thus, each soul is free to accept, reject, or ignore other souls and ignore the creation itself. There are many among you who engage daily in working upon the law of one in one of its primal distortions, that is, the ways of love. However, if this same soul, being biased from the depths of its soul by consciously seeking love light, were then to accept responsibility for each moment in the time-space accumulation of present moments available to it, such an entity can empower its progress exponentially. Wow. Okay, so Ra's talking about here, if you become consciously aware that what you're really trying to do is evolve in mind, body, and spirit along one of the two paths, then you empower your progress exponentially. So it's my prayer that these videos, and perhaps this one in particular, reaches whoever it needs to reach. I think there are millions and millions and millions of souls on this planet who have incarnated here with the desire to wake up once again to the process of evolution. But it's very easy on this planet to get stuck in what Ra calls the planetary game, you know, playing games of politics or getting stuck in low level desires, right? Hoarding money or, you know, wanting materialistic things that are certainly not going to be leaving with us when we leave. And of course, I'm guilty of this to an extent too, but I am certainly not confused about the rules of the game and what I'm here to be doing. So I'm doing my part as best I can here. Good. Now, the technical, let's talk about the technical sort of metaphysical principle at play when we're going to polarize to the extent necessary for graduation, positive and negative. Ra talks about this right here. Ra says, the necessity for graduation to fourth density is an ability to use, welcome, and enjoy a certain intensity of the white light of the one infinite creator. In your own terms, at your space-time nexus, this ability may be measured by your previously stated percentages of service. So remember, energy is conscious, consciousness is energetic. Energy stems, first of all, from the one infinite creator, from the infinite's desire to experience itself as finite. Infinite energy began to flow outwards. Portions of that infinitely expanding energy found their focus, became co-creators. Those co-creators then utilize light to create their own sort of universe, right? Dimensions, galaxies, solar systems, planets, planetary entities, space, time. All of it is created using light. So these percentages is 51% service to others or 95% service to self. What's actually happening is we're gathering and we're utilizing a certain intensity of light. And we will have to sort of hold a certain level of light to cross the threshold from 3D to 4D, right? There's a certain level of like resistance at the passage of going from 3 into 4. And so I kind of visualize it like, you know, we leave the incarnation, we're then in a sort of light body. That light body is simply put to the wall of 4D and it says, can you permeate this? Can you go through this, depending on what the quality of your inner light is? And it's a yes or a no. I mean, and it's kind of crazy because I think a soul who is at 50.997% service to others, they still can't cross, right? So they've still got to repeat 3D. Of course, if you're that close, you're going to, at that point, be programming your incarnation and you will be setting up the circumstances by which you will likely be able to achieve harvestability. But I think this is important to know. What we're doing when we polarize one way or the other is we're welcoming, utilizing, and Ra says enjoying a certain amount of light, quality of light, okay? So next, Don asks, then through free will, sometime in the third density experience, the path splits and an entity consciously chooses a path. Does an entity consciously choose this path at the initial splitting point? Ra says, we speak in generalities, which is dangerous for always inaccurate. However, we realize you look for the overview, so we will eliminate anomalies and speak of majorities. The majority of third density souls are far along the chosen path before realization of that path is conscious. Don then asks, I assume that an entity on either path can decide to choose paths at any time and possibly retrace steps, the path changing becoming more difficult the farther along it has gone. Is this correct? Ra says this is incorrect. The further an entity has what you would call polarized, the more easily this entity may change polarity, for the more power and awareness the entity will have. Those truly helpless are those who have not consciously chosen, but who repeat patterns without knowledge of the repetition or the meaning of the pattern, right? So, this last part, those truly helpless are those who have not consciously chosen polarity and they simply repeat endless incarnations hoping without knowledge of what's going on. They don't know the game that they're playing or the rules of the game or the mechanism of the game. Next, Don says, I believe we have a very, very important point here. It then seems that there is an extreme potential in this polarization, the same as there is in electricity. We have a positive and negative pole. The more you build the charge on either of these, the greater potential difference and the greater the ability to do work, as we call it, in the physical. This would seem to me to be the exact analogy that we have in consciousness here. Is this correct? Ra says this is precisely correct. And so I can speak briefly to my own experience. Since Ra says that third density souls are pretty far along one path or another before they really become aware of what they're doing, uh, I feel that for me, I was probably a decent way along the service to self path. Of course, not consciously. I had no idea what I was doing here on Earth. This was about I've been doing this for 11, 12 years now, sort of started meditating, doing things like breath work, yoga, self exploration. But before that, I didn't really care about anybody. I just wanted what I wanted on the short term in my daily life, which was to smoke weed and drink and to just fuck around, basically. And I didn't really care if. Um, I took advantage of other people in order to get what I wanted on a really short term basis. And so when I found this material specifically, I woke back up and I quickly was able to swing to service to others. And at least in intention and desire and will, I really wanted to heal myself so that I could be a force for good. And I think that it happened fairly rapidly because I had been, um, you know, how, if I had to use a percentage, what would I say? I was probably like 75, 25, 75% service to self, 25% service to others. So pretty far along, but still nowhere near the level required for graduation. Had I continued along that path, I would have accumulated a lot of karma and I would have looked back on this incarnation and that I did not complete what I came here to do and there'd be a lot of lessons to relearn and to sort of some sort of karmic imbalances that would need to be balanced in the next incarnation or set of incarnations. So I'm always grateful that I found this and that I've been able to remember my place here and what I feel really, truly, deeply within myself, what I'm supposed to be doing and I'm simply trying to go about it in the best way I know how. Okay? Okay, continuing here, Don asks, then the concept of service to self or service to others is mandatory if we wish to have work, whether it be work in consciousness or work in the mechanical or Newtonian concept in the physical. Is this correct? Ra says, this is correct with one addendum. The coil, as you may understand this term, is wound, is potential, is ready. The thing that is missing without polarizing is the charge. Don asks, then the charge is provided by individualized consciousness. Is this correct? Ra says, the charge is provided by the individualized soul using the inpourings and instreamings of intelligent slash cosmic energy through the choices of free will. So, yeah, each choice that we make, we're charging up along positive or negative path, right? So next, Don asks about the negative path, the service to self path specifically. So let's see what Ra has to say here. Don asks, can you tell me what bias creates momentum towards the path of service to self? Ra says, I am Ra. We can speak only in metaphor. Some love the light, some love the darkness. It is a matter of the unique and infinitely various creator choosing and playing among its experiences as a child upon a picnic. Some enjoy the picnic and find the sun beautiful, the food delicious, the games refreshing, and glow with the joy of creation. Some find the night delicious, their picnic being pain, difficulty, suffering of others, and the examination of the perversities of nature. These souls enjoy a different picnic. All these experiences are available. It is the free will of each soul which chooses the form of play, the form of pleasure. So note how plainly Ra discusses the negative path here with no judgment whatsoever. Okay, so this is sixth density consciousness. This is a very high teacher speaking who understands that in their density there is no polarity, there is no right or wrong, there is no left or right, there's no positive negative. And so I mean, for us, there is positive, negative. We're here to make the positive and negative choice. But the fact that both choices are freely available for the choosing can be a real stumbling block, I think, for spiritual seekers when they come across this material. And it was certainly troubling for me. And I think it was most troubling because I grew up in the West and I grew up under the sort of umbrella of Christian dogma where it's good versus evil, it's heaven or hell. If you go to hell, you're there for eternity, and you can only get to heaven by accepting Jesus as your savior. And I love Jesus. I have a huge admiration for Jesus and the quality of life that he lived. I, however, think that his teachings have been perverted and taken over by the church, which is essentially a cult on a massive scale in order to control people and guide them along whatever the people who run the church think is best. Anyway, there's just no judgment when Ra talks about the negative path. And so it's helpful. It's been very helpful for me to start to view people through the lens of positive and negative polarization, right? And it's really helped me to open the heart and to just be accepting, more understanding, more forgiving, and more compassionate, that that's what's happening here on earth. People are making their choices. They might not be aware of it, but they're polarizing positive and they're polarizing negative, and so be it. We're all in the end going to end up in the same place. And we learned in the last video that in sixth density, the negative polarity is completely abandoned because all others need to be seen as equal and as important as the self. So all this trouble that negative souls go through in order to evolve along the negative path, they're going to have to leave it behind at some point, which is a bit humorous, and it kind of points to the more efficient path if you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. So I think that's worth mentioning, as it's been very helpful for me. Now, the negative path on earth, I think there are very, very few human beings here who are consciously aware of what's going on in the negative sense and who are attempting to move on from 3D in the negative sense. If I had to estimate, I would say, gosh, less than, I don't know, 5,000, maybe 10, maybe. That seems high. Like, it's the negative elites, right? These are the people who run worlds and who cause wars, and they want endless wars. They want endless suffering for self-benefit, right? Companies who build the tanks and who build the bombs and who build the weapons, and they pay off the politicians, and they're all starting wars with each other. There's a certain small, very small percentage of people who benefit and enrich themselves no matter what is happening, while the quality of life for normal people continues to deteriorate. So there's really not that many of them. Unfortunately, they're in charge of the resources and they sort of run the show at this point. And we're at a turning point where I think that's kind of it's reaching critical mass, in that humanity is going to have to decide if they're going to, through their own ignorance and their own free will, allow themselves to be enslaved more totally by these negative beings, or is humanity, who I believe is generally positive and wants peace and a peaceful joyful, comforting, relaxing life, are we going to be able to wake up and to resist what the negative forces want, which is total enslavement and domination of humanity? Okay, so that's where we're at, but the negative path just is what it is. And so Ra has a few more quotes here regarding the negative path, which I have found very helpful. Ra says, "The law of one blinks neither at the light or the darkness, but is available for service to others and service to self. However, service to others results in service to self. True love of self increases through loving others, thus preserving and further harmonizing the energies of those souls seeking intelligent infinity through these disciplines. Those seeking intelligent energy through the use of service to self create the same amount of power as those seeking through service to others, but, as we have said, have constant difficulty because of the concept of separation, which is implicit in the behaviors of the service to self, which involve power over others. This weakens and eventually disintegrates the energy collected by such souls. It should be noted, carefully pondered, and accepted that the law of one is available to any soul or group of souls which has decided to strive together for any seeking of purpose, be it service to others or service to self. The laws, which are the primal distortions of the law of one, then are placed into operation, and physical reality is used as a medium for the development of the results of those choices freely made. Thus, all entities learn, no matter what they seek. All learn the same lessons, some rapidly, some slowly. So this is kind of just what I was just saying. Everyone's going back to the same place. Some are going to get there faster than others, but it's completely their free will how they choose to get there. Okay. Uh, Next, Don asks, I'm trying to understand how a negative soul or group of souls would progress. I was of the opinion that a closer understanding of the law of one created the condition of acceptability, moving, say, from our third density to the fourth in our transition now. And I'm trying to understand how it would be possible if you were pointed toward service to self, how you would progress, say, from the third to the fourth. What learning would be necessary for that? Ra says, you will recall that we went into some detail as to how those not oriented towards seeking service for others, yet nevertheless found and can use the gateway to intelligent infinity, right? Welcoming and utilizing a certain amount of white light. The beings are harvested because they can see and enjoy the light love of the appropriate density. Those who have found this light love slash love light without benefit of a desire for service to others, nevertheless, by the law of free will, have the right to the use of that light love for whatever purpose. I think there's a typo there. Also, it may be inserted that there are systems of study which enable the seeker of separation to gain these gateways. This study is as difficult as the one which we have described to you, but there are those with the perseverance to pursue the study, just as you desire to pursue the difficult path of seeking to know in order to serve others. Those who seek to serve the self are seen by the law as precisely the same as those who seek to serve others, for are all not one? To serve yourself and to serve others is a dual method of saying the same thing, if you can understand the essence of the law of one. Okay, so that is the final quote here. And again, I don't think that I'll make a more important video on this channel. And I hope I've done these concepts justice. I hope I've done the law of one justice by speaking about it clearly. I've certainly done my best. I don't have full understanding of anything, but I do have a good grasp of this, I feel. And just remember, the purpose of incarnation in physical form is to evolve in mind, body, and spirit. The purpose of third density incarnation is to learn the ways of love. The third density is a choice. Those three things, I've kept them in my mind as often as possible, and it served me well. And if we're going to polarize along the service to others path, we would just need to look at ways in which we are unbalanced, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, that may be inhibiting or preventing that service. And so in the next set of videos, we're going to get into the chakras, the energy centers, which I mentioned very briefly in the video on the 7 densities. Now, the level of balance or imbalance that we have within the chakras determines the quality of our perception. It determines what we think about, how we think about things, how we perceive things, how we react emotionally to certain things, or let's say don't react emotionally to things. um, the state of our physical body, the sort of opening or the brightness, let's say, of the shining of the soul. These are all related to the chakras. There's 7 of them. Each of them have their own qualities and characteristics that are really important to understand. Um, in a balanced state, they have certain qualities and characteristics. In an unbalanced state, they have certain qualities and characteristics. And again, those imbalances will manifest in mind, emotion, body, and spirit. And so we'll talk more about the process of positive and negative polarization and which chakras are being utilized or not utilized along either path. And this is where we get more and more. From here, we'll go more into self healing and self balancing, which is equally important. And when coupled with an understanding of the choice here to make in 3D, it creates a very, very powerful sort of framework that we can move within in order to achieve our chosen evolution in mind, body, and spirit. Okay? Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.